Hi, dear listener. Welcome to the Young Changemakers podcast, an initiative from Global Changemakers. Your co-hosts, Sophie, George, and William are very happy to have you join us today. Over this first season, we'll show you the incredible impact of youth and hopefully inspire you to take action too. Don't forget to subscribe, and if you're ready, let's go!
Hi there, and welcome to the 6th episode of the Young Changemakers podcast series. I'm super excited to be able to share this episode with you. I'm your co-host, George Chapman. And before beginning the episode, I'd just like to introduce you to my guest today, Valeria Perez. She is a 21-year-old from El Salvador in Central America. And since at the age of 14, she has been involved in youth educational programs about human rights. Vale and a group of young El Salvadorans created the project Generational Succession in Human Rights Education. Their objective was that they were able to get young people to be in charge of teaching other young people about human rights and historical memory. And in 2017, they had a big achievement. They won the Oscar Nofello Romero Ibero American Prize for Human Rights Education. And in the future, Vale is passionate and determined that she wants to create a Salvadoran National Human Rights Defenders Network to continue to keep weaving El Salvador's memory for young people to take the lead in building a more just and equitable country. So without further ado, please enjoy the episode. Okay, hi Valeria.
Hi.
How are you? So welcome to my second episode of the Young podcast. I'm super excited to have you on this show and have a chat to you about, get to know you a bit more. We met back in, when was that? In July. For our listeners, we met at the Global Youth Summit in Switzerland. Brought together 60 young changemakers from all over the globe, pretty much. And I was fortunate enough to meet Vale there. So Vale, I'd just like to first of all, could you tell us a bit more about your upbringing in El Salvador and what got you involved in the area of human rights education and in particular youth empowerment, and then and why does this area of work mean so much to you?
Well, thank you for having me, George. I'm really excited to share a little bit about what we do in El Salvador. So the project I'm in, it's called Generational Successions in Human Rights Education. And this project was born in a museum called Museum of the Word and Image in El Salvador, which tries to recover the lost documents and memory of the past and history of El Salvador. So when I was between 14 and 15 years old, I went to my first human rights workshops at the museum. And, it was totally life-changing for me. Like, it made me realize what was going on around the world and kind of took me out of my bubble and made me kind of interact with more young people that were already engaged in activism and youth empowerment activities. And these workshops took me to other opportunities, for youth empowerment, to know about the history of El Salvador, to know about what I wanted to do with my life, in the situation like El Salvador, which I'm going to talk a little bit later. So after this process of kind of getting immersed in the world of human rights and the role that young people have in countries such as El Salvador and Latin America in general. With a group of friends, we decided that it was the moment to make our own workshops about human rights. And the museum was very, very open, and they allowed us to, try to brainstorm whatever ideas we wanted to talk about in human rights education. And because of the story behind the museum, that, you know, it was open after the end of the Civil War that lasted 12 years, from the like 79, 80s to the 1992, when they signed peace treaties.
Mm-hmm.
So the museum evolved in this kind of post-war situation where, you know, all these documents, all these, you know, histories about the atrocities that were committed during the Civil War needed these spaces for people to know and to gather all this information. So because of all the documentation and all like the tools that the museum would offer, we try to merge the historical memory with the approach of, you know, the general human rights education that we to teach on our workshops. And the good thing about the workshop is that the participants that go to these processes are able to take the tools that we offer and bring them back to their own communities. So this can start like spreading out and go from one, you know, from one youth to another.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's like the beautiful thing about this, is that young people are the ones in charge to share these stories and share these tools with other young people.
Okay, no, I mean, after I've done a bit of reading on the history and the context of El Salvador, I mean, a 12-year civil war isn't easy for any country to bounce back from. Let's backtrack a bit, Vale, and sort of you got involved in human rights and sort of historical memory, education and youth empowerment type of work at the age of, what you said, 14 or 15. Now that's quite young to begin learning
Yeah.
about such in-depth and complex history of your own country. So what was your upbringing like in El Salvador? Just because I'd be interested to know how the context you grew up in and what got you engaged in and to build that sort of awareness at such a young age.
Oh, yeah, sure. So I was born in 1998. So that was like 6 years after the Civil War ended.
Yeah.
And I was born in a context of an amnesty law. Because after the Civil War ended, a year after the Civil War ended, they created an amnesty law between the guerrillas and the government, the militaries, where, you know, they forced us in some way to ignore all the human rights violations that were committed during the Civil War. So there was no justice and no laws that granted reparation to the victims that, you know, suffered these types of violations. At the end, they were the victims of everything that happened during the Civil War. So I think it was a mixture between my family also, because my mom always taught me about the importance of knowing all the sides of the stories, and most of my country. So I always kind of was involved in this spectrum of the importance of, you know, acting for justice and listening to the people that were eager to find this justice and not vengeance. You know, that's important, just like justice. And also in my school, one of my best friends, his father is the director of the museum.
Okay.
The project, you know, is connected to.
Yeah.
So he was the one that invited me to my first workshops. So, you know, I was really a kid, but I was able to grasp this sense of what was happening and how in school they didn't teach us what my mom was teaching me, and in school they didn't teach us what I was learning in the museum. So I understood that there was this gap of knowledge, and that the narratives that we were reading in our history books, in our social study books, about something that happened out of nowhere, that happened because years of oppression to to indigenous people, to peasants, to lower classes, from the upper, social status, the oligarchies, and also the intervention of the U.S. government. So I think it was just like all this mixture that came together in my first workshops. And so
No, that's
that's
a great answer. I mean, so in these workshops, I mean, you're targeting youth as well.
Yeah.
Is that due to that you've noticed, like within El Salvador, there's a bit of a marginalization and stigmatization against youth?
Yes.
In El Salvador, could you maybe elaborate a bit more on that, and why is that such a thing?
Okay. This is like a really complex
Because this is like
topic.
your whole work and your whole sort of purpose is to empower youth. But I'd like to understand a bit more about why they're being sort of not treated so well in society.
Okay, so maybe we can divide like the answer between two sections. So first, it will be like we are the post-war generations. So we are the ones mostly forced to forget our memory. So if this commitment listen to the narratives of the victims of the Civil War, is not within us, like within the youth, in any other institution or in any other space. So I think that's why it's important, the work of the museum itself, and also the work that the museum allows youth to perform and to connect and to form this network. And I think that also like these spaces allows to society to see how youth have like more to offer in themes about reparation, in themes about citizenship, in themes about this power that the youth have, not just like going on. Instead, it's just we are capable to enact change, and we're capable to eliminate these structures, this patriarchal structure, and that at the end kind of leads us to the stigmatization that in general youth suffer, and in El Salvador and in Latin America in general. For example, there's certain sectors in El Salvador where youth are more stigmatized than others. You can either mention, society in general. You can either mention from police corps. You can either mention like from the. So there are a lot of sectors where you can see how the government in general works in a way that lives in a marginalized sector, from education, from health policies, but right now we are kind of concentrating more on the education area. So yeah,
I guess there must be a whole lot of underlying reasons contributing to sort of youth. I mean, from a bit of reading on El Salvador, there's a lot of youth engaged in gang violence. That could be to unemployment for youth, or unfair upbringing. There's a whole lot of factors that come into play there, not just the historical context. But yeah, definitely the work that you're doing. I mean, lots of societies globally who have been impacted, impaired by civil war, or they've always, I think, struggled to bring that back into the conversation and improve the social fabric, so to speak. Does require a bit of reflection and then understanding and taking lessons away from what had happened.
Yeah, exactly.
Sure.
And that kind of takes us to the methodology that we do in our workshops, because we use the past, present, future methodologies. So for example, in the last workshop we gave, we kind of took two important social problematics that were the forced evictions of a community called El Espino, and also the the initiatives to privatize water. So in these two problematics, we tried to understand what was like the root of each problematic, and we kind of like took back and we went back in time to understand what was the source of this. And at the time that we go back, we understand that it's not just like something that comes out of nowhere, but instead are like, you know, like how you mentioned, a lot of factors contributing to the problematics that we are facing right now.
Hi there. We hope you're enjoying this episode so far. We just wanted to let you know that we are on social media at WeAreGCM, and don't hesitate to follow us. And if you'd like to support us further, we also have a Patreon page. Type in Global Changemakers and decide which tier is best for you. Thank you. And now, on with the rest of the episode. Val, just moving on a bit, I want to ask a question. How important is it that Salvadorian youth enhance their leadership skills and begin to or continue to improve this broken social fabric we've been talking about in El Salvador?
Okay, I think more than leadership is community work, it's teamwork, and I think these spaces are the ones in charge to make this possible. Because when you feel that you're supported by other young people that kind of feel the same, like this sad and depression of all the atrocities, committed, like, it's insane. And right now, if you see like what is happening all over Latin America, you see like this empowerment of youth, but it's not individual, it's just like this community empowerment that are trying to bring back all the struggles that were kind of like all this fightings against the government, all these fightings against the injustices that were committed. And I think that's how, in some way, we seek this leadership, because it's a community work. And also,
I think
because
I agree with you there, because I asked this question to, I mean, I kind of myself spent a lot of time in Kenya, and the conversation inevitably comes up. What's the issues that this country and other developing countries are facing? And it always comes down to the lack of leadership. Given that a lot of leaders around the world are, doing all sorts of things, bit of corruption here and there. But I think when you talk about the power of youth, it's that collaboration. I mean, we look at the global climate strikes that we're seeing. That's
exactly,
it's massive. And there's definitely a new wave of excitement in youth. We definitely still learn a lot from our parents, like you mentioned earlier. But there's definitely something I'm seeing, especially with people I've talked to like yourself. So I'm going to move on to I'm going to ask you for a bit of advice, maybe, if you can give us some pointers, and the listeners, like, what would you suggest for other young people keen to create positive social change in their communities? How do you think they could get involved? Whether that be activism, social justice issues, what do you think are like the first steps one can take?
I think the first one is, don't be afraid of history. Don't be afraid of all the narratives around you. And don't be afraid to face the reality that we're kind of, struggling with right now. Because like I mentioned before, like the workshops took me out of my bubble. So try not to stick into your bubble. Try to, pop up that bubble and be open to talk with people, to understand how can your life be effective to help these people, to help yourself, and to help the world in general. And understand that, this, what we talk about, the community support is about is not about just what we're suffering today, what we're facing years and years and years ago. And that's the problem, because we weren't able to target these problems that were happening in the past. Now everything is just like getting out of control now in some way. So I think those two, like, don't be afraid of the past. Don't be afraid of problems that our grandparents, that our grandmothers faced, that their ancestors faced, in order to build this community between us and kind of weave this memory. That's what the museum says, like, weave this memory between us in order to enact a real change.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent answer. No, I think when you mentioned sort of don't be fearful, I mean, yeah, there's this sort of bubble that you have to burst, isn't it? You started this when you're only, this sort of work when you're only 14 or 15, as I mentioned. I mean, and it just takes experience. Like, I'm new to doing a podcast. I mean, I've done some complete blunders in our conversation today, but it's fine. Like, yeah, just through experience, and you make mistakes, you pick yourself up again and on to the next one, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just like, embrace fear. Just take it with, deal with it, because it's powerful. Fear is also powerful. Fear also joins people together.
And it sounds cliche, but it's so true. I think if, like, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? I mean, if you make a mistake or you stand up and give a speech that you think you've sort of blundered, I can guarantee you, if you're listening and you're keen to get involved in a project, or there's been something that you want to volunteer, but you've been putting it off for various reasons, I guarantee you you'll feel a lot better if you step out of your comfort zone than if you hadn't. I think everyone who I met in Switzerland at the summit would agree with that.
And yeah, I mean, I think also a real important thing here is not to be selfish, in a way that when we try to get involved in activism and this kind of area of our lives, is just for the people in the future, to also have a place in this world. And I think there's no more choice, there's just like no more choice. If we want to save the world, if we want to save our environment, if we want to save our ancestors, our histories, our memories, our cultures, our identities, I think there's no more choice. We need to act. We need to do something,
Yeah.
It's just yeah.
So Val, you're now in Vancouver, yeah?
Yeah.
What are you studying there?
Oh, so right now I'm just in a faculty of arts. I just started university about 4 months ago.
Yeah.
And I'm in my first year, and I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do with my academic life. But
because it's just kind of leading on to my next question, and
okay.
potentially my last question. Like, obviously you've already created a lot of change in El Salvador, in your communities, particularly for youth, and you're only 21 years of age yourself. There's a big question, but do you have any big visions or hopes, dreams that you want to do with yourself in the future? And I guess I'm asking, like, you mentioned that you've just started a course in Vancouver. You've moved countries, first time in Canada. How does that link to your long-term goals?
Whoa. Well,
sorry, I threw a bit of it.
No, it's okay, because I think I need to start thinking about it.
It's a bit of a full-on question for a Monday morning.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, so right now, one of my biggest plans is to do a major in Latin American studies. I know it's kind of funny because I was in Latin America and I moved to study Latin American studies, but and also, try to do like a fusion between Latin America and Canada, like the kind of scope that I have, and bring the museum to Canada.
Oh wow.
To the kind of a collaboration between the university I'm studying with and the museum, and so like
Okay, like a cross-cultural sort of
yeah.
educational platform. Yeah.
Yeah, and then also, I'm going back on summer, and with the museum, we're also starting to see what kind of new workshops we can do. But in this time, we want to do workshops outside of the capital, like the city.
Mm-hmm.
But also try to understand what in other sectors of El Salvador want to learn, like how can we help for kind of like organizations and structures of youth around El Salvador, what we can offer them, what do they need. Yeah.
No, that sounds excellent. I mean, it sounds exciting. I've only been to I've only been to South America very briefly, but I think Central America and El Salvador is definitely on my list. I'll be coming to visit you at the museum.
Yeah. Yeah, of course.
I'd
Yeah,
love
you
to
can come.
learn a bit more about the history and the important work that you're doing there.
Oh, thank you, George.
Yeah. No, thanks very much, Val. It's been excellent chatting to you today.
If you'd like to know more about Global Changemakers and our mission of enabling youth to create a positive impact in their communities, you can visit our website at global-changemakers.net or follow us on social media at WeAreGCM. And if you'd like to support us further, go check out our Patreon page at Global Changemakers and help us have a greater impact. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Young Changemakers. See you next Tuesday.